Hello and welcome back to Behind the Post. My next guest leads the national social media team at EY Canada, one of the big four global management consulting firms. His team of 4 social media marketers develop demand generation and brand marketing programs in support of EY's sector, service line, employer brand, talent, and executive teams to drive increased differentiation, engagement, loyalty, and sales. Outside of EY, he runs his own social media marketing business, Due Diligence, and works as a consultant for a Canadian mental health startup, First Session, and runs the Bookstagram account Deliterate. Without further ado, please welcome to the show, Dylan Doyle. Dylan, are you ready to go behind the post with me?
I am absolutely thrilled to be going behind the post with you, and thank you so much for nailing that bio. I think hearing somebody else read it, it's a mouthful, but you did great.
Thank you. Well, amazing. I'm excited to jump in because you and your team are building something really incredible over at EY, and you have quite the impressive background. So I thought to kick off the show, I would love if you could share a little bit more about your professional journey and what brought you to EY.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably go back like 10 years to when I started at university. I was like very involved in like student media and student government, and I was like doing political science and history, and I was like, there's such like a huge disconnect between what I'm studying and like what I'm actually interested in and like what I'm doing extracurricularly. So kind of did the like thing that every university student does, where I was fully anticipating someone to like knock at my door and be like, would you love to be like the CEO of this company with a Bachelor of Arts? It didn't happen. So did a bit of soul searching, taught English in Korea for a year. Wow. And really set a goal for myself to be like, you can go and have fun, teach English, but like you need to come out of here with like some sort of game plan for like what's next. So pursued a postgrad in sort of like traditional PR, knew that wasn't for me, knew I really wanted to do social digital. So right after my program was finished, did a really impactful internship with the Canadian Hearing Society. And that was like such a huge lesson, sort of like almost in like audience segmentation. We had folks that were like deafened, hard of hearing, so many different audiences, and was like a huge lesson that I've applied to social since, where it's like, not every audience needs the same thing. It's like so important to do like social listening and like, really understand what their challenges or, what they're interested in. From there, I was like an agency kid for 3 years. I really credit that with like being social media boot camp, like ran everything from like influencer campaigns to being on set to waking up at 6 a.m. and doing community management war rooms. Worked with really big consumer packaged goods, quick serve restaurants, and like the largest Canadian like mall retailer. So like a really broad range of social throughout those 3 years. Completely pivoted, went into the cannabis space 3 months before it was legalized here in Canada. Did that for a year and a half. I think that taught me a lot of resilience because we were completely unable to do any paid advertising at the time in 2018. So made me extremely resourceful and really flexible, able to pivot quickly to come up with some interesting strategies to engage with our audience. And then a random posting came up for like Ernst & Young, and one of my really close friends had just gotten a job at Deloitte. I had never thought that I would almost fit into a corporate environment. And, the more people throughout the interview process that I met, I was just like, this is like, so like, I had to confront maybe my own biases about like working in a corporate environment. And it's actually 2 years tomorrow, depending on when you listen to this podcast. That's April 14th is my 2-year anniversary. And it's been like literally such a great 2 years. Like I finally feel like I'm at a place in my career where I'm working on like meaningful stuff and like
Mhm.
constantly innovating, growing a team. So that's kind of my professional journey.
Wow, that's quite the journey, and congratulations on your 2 years. That's amazing.
Thanks.
I always think it's interesting to hear how social media managers came to be working in social. And I also think it's funny we kind of have a similar experience here. I also taught English to Chinese students. I wasn't in China. I did teach it virtually, but I also used to be a teacher, so kind of a little similarity there. But correct me if I'm wrong, you were one of the first dedicated social media marketers at EY, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, back in April 2020, I was sort of hired as like our first dedicated social team. Previously, it was under our PR and communications team. Shout out to Sarah and her team; they're wonderful. But yeah, I was hired as the first dedicated social person, and
Mhm.
even just like again, starting to think about like our fiscal end is coming up at the end of June 30th, so we're in sort of like next year planning. Um, and really building this sort of like where we started to where we are now slide, just like a huge sense of pride for like the ways that we've evolved our organic presence, our paid presence, social listening, benchmarking, competitive intel, community management, all the hats that like we
Mhm.
wear as social media managers. It's just been like it's just so fun. It's so fun to see like where we started versus where we're at now. So I'm
Yeah.
really proud of the work we've been doing.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely showing. And I mean, you recently won an award. So congratulations for all that you are doing. But I want
Thank
to
you.
chat about when you first started at EY, what were the first things that you did? Like, what did you tackle right away when you first started?
Totally. So the structure when I started was a lot different than it is now. Like our team, the team that I started on, it was sort of like brand, content, and social, like sort of holistically, thinking about it like more as a function. And then gradually we kind of broke things out, understanding that social is obviously like a go-to-market channel that needed to sort of like kind of be like its own thing outside of brand and content.
Mhm.
Um, but kind of like going back to like my journey a little bit, for whatever reason, I was like so nervous going into B2B. I think because I had done so much B2C and I really psyched myself out. Like I had gotten I'd gotten the job at EY. Like I'd signed, I'd like crossed all my T's and dotted all my I's at I think like 10 a.m. on a Monday. And then I actually got laid off from the job that I was about to give notice at 5 p.m. the same day. So
Oh
it
my
worked out
God.
really, really well. So I had a month between when I started, and I really psyched myself out, being like, I don't know about B2B. I haven't done this before.
Mhm.
But then I like sort of thought critically. I'm like, I had never worked in cannabis before. I'd never worked in agency before. So I was like, what did I do in those places? Like, what can I actually like apply
Mhm.
the Ernst and Young sort of context? So really what I did is I like did the same thing that I do with any social platform or like new social platform that I'm launching or new campaign that I'm launching. I did like almost like an internal social media audit of the company that I had just joined. So like
Mhm.
the same way that we would like, if we're taking over like a new Instagram account, sort of like looking at the Instagram insights and seeing like what location are these people in, what's their gender breakdown and age breakdown. I really
Mhm.
like assessed who my internal audience was, um, the ways that they like to learn and like be communicated to, like what content they would maybe find valuable from like an internal perspective. And then of course, like looking at like historical benchmarks, obviously in the context of like EY, like what kinds of campaigns had done well in the past, like what kinds of campaigns have been done point blank period. And then like what service lines have worked with us. So doing that audit and kind of like evaluating things from like a SWOT analysis perspective was like super,
Mhm.
super helpful. The things that I learned were like my CMO is a data nerd. She absolutely loves data.
Mhm.
The team that I'm building, that's like one of like our central tenants where I'm like, everything needs to be data oriented.
Yeah.
Like I'm totally happy if you want to bring, something innovative or like a cool idea. Um, but like if we are doing, more sort of like standard baseline things or, working with a group that's already run a campaign, like I want to see the data and the intel and the insights that's informing that strategy. And I think that sort of approach is like really like we've like basically 10x'd so much of what we've been doing, from like our paid budgets, our employee advocacy program, the ways that we educate stakeholders internally. So that like taking that like social media audit from like an external perspective and applying it to like the internal context of EY was like, I think, critical for my success. And I think to anyone listening out there, you're starting in a new industry, that's something I would recommend that was really successful for me.
So would you say that that kind of data-driven approach is what helped you get buy-in from leadership?
100%, like unequivocally, yes. Like a large part of that as well was sort of like, we all think about sort of like our personal brand on social. I think about it like social capital within whatever organization you're working in. And I knew that I was like, I want to like set myself apart. Like, how can I set myself apart from like maybe what other people on my team are doing? So a couple ways I did that, like every single week, like one of the gaps that I had identified was like, we're not doing as much real-time reporting. It's always helpful to have like those numbers sort of like, you know, to go back on and be like, if we were running an always on campaign, did we see the hockey stick moment where it's like our costs went down while our performance went up? So having this like weekly reporting email has been such a great opportunity and tool for us to like go back in time and say like, it was week 10 that the campaign like actually like had that turning point. So my CMO's name is Fatima, and I came up with this like weekly email that's in her inbox by like 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays called, I'm going to try not to trip over my words on this, Fast Facts, Figures, and Features for Fatima.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and it's something that like, you know, I distribute to Fatima, and then I distribute to our whole BMC team, and we always try to find innovative ways to get people to like to increase our open rate. So we've since kind of moved to like doing like an example being like, what's the view through rate looking like on like Olivia's campaign, or like which company is like, you know, has like the highest view rate versus completion rate on like Olivia's campaign, like answers to these questions and more in it. So trying to keep it engaging, like in the same way we keep social engaging for our audience. Like there's a lot of work obviously that happens at a management consulting firm. So really trying to break through the noise and like encourage people to read that sort of information. And then like sort of to your question, like that type of like real-time reporting, it's made us so more nimble with campaigns. Like we're really trying to move to an always on campaign model versus like doing little flighted models. It really provides an opportunity for like our competitors to slide into that white space, versus if we like are able to have that topic ownership by staying always on, it becomes like, you know, harder to do that. So by providing that real-time stuff, we're able to say to stakeholders, like, we're 6 weeks out from when like the time that your campaign is going to end. Here's what performance looks like. Here's what like our recommendations for maybe like a phase 2 look like. We always talk about things in like almost like a hum, sing, shout model. We borrowed that from our partners at LinkedIn, but always maintaining that sort of steady hum of like valuable content to your business decision makers or buyers. And then looking for those moments where it's like a sing or a shout moment could be like a new ad format. Maybe we've been doing sponsored content. Now we can do like a sponsored video post, or trying conversation ads, or, you know, trying reels on Instagram. So the data piece is like, I think, really been the turning point for our social team here at EY.
Yeah. I want to dive in a little more to the examples and kind of talking about the campaigns a little bit, because I know you've come from B2C. So I would love to know a few of the lessons that you've learned in B2C and how you're kind of applying them in the B2B space.
100%. So I think the biggest lesson for me is like keeping things streamlined and simple, like establishing process where they're like maybe wasn't already process, and thinking about things like, again, the sort of like mirrored out approach of like, how are we approaching this externally? How can we approach this internally with like our social strategy? So I'm gonna give a hopefully not too confused metaphor here, but for fans of the like 2004 film Mean Girls, which is like one of my favorites, um, you know, the sort of infamous like chalkboard moment with like Janice and Katie, you know, talking about like, how are we going to take Regina George down? We obviously have like Aaron Samuels, the hot body, and the army of fill in the blanks. This is being video recorded, so I'm not going to say that.
I think we all know. I think we got it.
We all know. I mean, for the fans out there, you'll definitely know what that is. So I kind of like grouped it, like I would make the comparison of like, you know, identifying like, as opposed to taking this Regina George character down, how do we prop this EY brand sort of up? So our sort of Aaron Samuels, I would say, like was more of our brand pillars, and with the award that we just won, that was like one of like sort of the most like heartwarming things that I read was like, you know, we work in management consulting. I think like the way people think about it, it's like maybe not the sexiest industry or vertical to sort of work in. So sort of hearing the feedback that like this thing that we were very intentional about, like bringing it back to like a streamlined, simple approach is like the things that we want to be known for. Not ironically, I think intentionally, like it's Ernst & Young, it's EY. So like our 4 things all start with E. So our brand pillars really are like the Aaron Samuels, the things that like maybe are the arm candy and the things that we want people to see associated with our brand. So like equity, like showing the ways that like we're standing with folks from like a DE&I perspective. Education is huge. We actually have like our very first EY Ripples, which is like our sort of like corporate responsibility component here at EY. That's launching next week. So just like the ways that we're enabling Canadians to access those types of education opportunities through programs like EY Ripples. Entrepreneurship, another plug, Entrepreneur of the Year is like one of our big brand programs, and we're sort of like moving into a place where we'll be announcing regional finalists in the next little bit. We've been working with entrepreneurs for like 28 years. So really bringing like that campaign to life and showcasing like our diverse entrepreneur stories has been really critical. And then environment, timely because we're in Earth Month, obviously now it being April. You know, ESG is such a huge topic right now. I think like not even just in like management consulting, but like for every brand, which is environmental, social, and governance. So like 3 really important pillars, not just like brands being evaluated on like their financial stability, but the ways that they're doing good in the world as well. So that's our like Aaron Samuels. Using our like, we were recently rebranded within the last like 10 years. So using our assets in like a more like consistent way, I would say is like our hot body. And we've just really been trying to like reimagine like our brand value almost, like, you know, not having to do what people think is like EY or like any of the big 4. Like we don't have to be confined to this like stuffy perception maybe that we have. We're really trying to like humanize and authenticate. One of our big like internal drivers is like, it's not B2C, it's not B2B, it's B2H. Like we're speaking to humans at the end of the day. So really B2H marketing is like a huge component of what we hope we're bringing to life on our social channels. And then also looking at like the ways that employer brand, client marketing, and like broader community inspiration kind of come into that content. So not, again, just kind of sticking to like what's always been done, looking for new ways to innovate. And then finally, sort of like getting closer to our partners or our army of fill in the blanks. And those like platform partners, you know, have really enabled us to take like social from sort of the status quo in a sense to like, you know, we are a brand, we're a global brand. We have like over 300,000 employees. We have offices in almost every country, I think. Don't quote me on that, but in a lot of countries. So it's really helped us like, again, like bring almost like best practices apart from B2B or B2C, just like best practices like on social and digital, from like organic and paid, our employee advocacy program, social listening. So getting closer to our partners has been like hugely integral to sort of like our success here.
Well, it seems like you guys have everything nailed down. I love the analogy. Love Mean Girls. And I think it's really important that you noted that you are trying to step out of the box and be different, especially in more of like a stuffy kind of environment or with more technical brands. It's always important to be human at the end of the day, because that's ultimately what's going to reach people. So I think it's really amazing that you guys are doing that at EY. And I want to touch back on something that we mentioned earlier. You spoke about some of the growth that you guys have seen since you've started. And I know you guys have some big things are coming. So looking back on 2020, 2021, what can we expect from EY within 2022 and 2023?
I'm happy you asked, Olivia, because we actually just launched our rebranded Instagram account. So if you would like to follow along, we're really trying, I think one of the focuses for our Instagram account that I see with brands like in B2B or B2C is a lot of retrofitted content. I'm like, if I can get this content on your LinkedIn account, why am I seeing it on Instagram? Like, what's the incentive for me as a person, or like as like a consumer or a client? Like, what's the incentive for me to follow you in both places? So that's a big component of the Instagram presence that we're trying to grow. So if you do want to follow, that is at EY Canada with an underscore at the end. I will say that it is a really fresh and like refreshing sort of like take, still staying within our brand guidelines. Like, folks will definitely still recognize that it's EY, but it's a lot more fresh. It's a lot more modern. I was like, us like trying to sleep at like 1 a.m. on Monday when we were launching on Tuesday, and really annoying my partner and telling him like, I'm just so excited to like launch our new Instagram aesthetic and our feed. And so that's like one of sort of our big focuses, is really finding our voice on that platform, you know, connecting outside of like just what it had previously been used for, which was like as a campus recruitment tool. And sort of like looking at the ways in which that was somewhat transactional. Like, hypothetically, once those university students are like consuming the content that has been sort of geared to enable them to get jobs at EY, like, does the content still become relevant? So we are sort of like expanding our scope in terms of the content that's on that channel, and making sure that it follows like the best practices for Instagram as well. We are also really, again, sort of like on the topic of like getting closer with our partners. We have really great relationships with a lot of, you know, like the big media partners. So we are looking at a couple of betas that are really excited, specifically with LinkedIn. We've previously participated in 2. So one of them being the LinkedIn Stories beta, RIP. LinkedIn Stories does not exist anymore, but it was a really fun beta to be part of. And then also document ads, which has been a huge game changer, as like, if you're running sort of like a brand awareness campaign, document ads, I would highly recommend in terms of click-through rate, engagement, and time with content. Has been really like a great way to incorporate like a multi-format strategy into a lot of our campaigns. So a couple of other betas that we're hoping to get involved with in the next couple of months. Definitely a huge focus for us. We're looking at adding a new team member in May. So Lauren, if you're listening, we're very much looking forward to having you join us next month. And then really just kind of looking at like some of the platforms that we aren't present on, and really thinking strategically, like I'm not the social media manager that thinks that you need to be absolutely everywhere. I would rather do a few things really great, and then once we have more bandwidth, then you know, maybe like a root cause for why we need to be on that platform. Like, that's always the approach that I've taken. So potentially looking at YouTube, you know, potentially looking at like expanding to Reddit, because they have like such great niche communities as well. You know, we work in like financial services and mining and metals and advanced manufacturing. So a lot of these are like quite niche, and like our audiences aren't always even on like a Twitter, definitely not an Instagram, LinkedIn, yes.
Yeah.
But Reddit, I think, is like also something that's kind of like an untapped area for us to explore. So those are really kind of like the things that we're focusing on for the next year. And really, I guess the last thing would be looking sort of internally, bringing folks along on the journey with us. So looking at like, again, new ways to speak to our internal stakeholders, lots of education around the work that we do, embedding social into the EY experience from like day dot. Like the second that you get an offer, there's like a social call to action, to sort of share about, your EY experience. So yeah, really looking forward to working with like our talent team, our demand generation teams, brand, employer brand. We have lots of really great partners internally. So looking forward to just kind of continuing fostering those.
Wow, a lot of exciting stuff coming. And I will
Yeah.
say, I totally looked at the Instagram and I'm loving it. I love how you've humanized it and tapped into that employer branding by highlighting your employees. So I'm very excited to follow along the next couple of months and see all of these initiatives being rolled out. But we're nearing the end of the show here. And I have one more question for you that I ask
Yeah.
all of my guests. And that is, what is one thing that you wish your colleagues in other departments knew about social media?
Um, I think for me, one of the things, maybe it's not something like about social media, but it's the way that like people talk about social media.
Mhm.
Um, I shared a post on LinkedIn sort of like about sort of like almost like commonly like words that are like phrases that we use that we maybe don't think about that are actually like quite harmful to specific groups. So
Mm.
one of the things when I started as like a hiring manager, I was like, I'm never, ever, ever going to put something out like on LinkedIn in a job post. It's like, I'm looking for like a social media guru or a social
Mhm.
media ninja. I was like, I'm not going to be that person
Mhm.
because on one hand, I find it incredibly infantilizing. There have been like times where like folks have like connected me in with like partners and they've described me as like a wizard. And I'm like, it almost makes me feel like you don't value like the insights and strategic prowess that my team is bringing by like sort of like referring to us with these like mystical creatures. It makes it feel like all of my hard work is somehow magic.
Mhm.
So that's one point. And then the second point is that like words like guru and ninja are like highly appropriative. They're, like guru is like the highest, like one of the highest in like Hindu culture in terms of like that sort of like recognition and status. So it feels so appropriative to use those words while also really taking away from like the hard work that social media teams everywhere do, often
Mhm.
as like teams of one. So I think that's one thing I would like folks to know about social media is that like, we when we have voices at the table, they're often strategic and focused and can really help with whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
Maybe on a more positive note in terms of like social, in terms of what I'd like our teams to know is like social media managers are like so great at like the dueling left and right brain. Like a lot of the times we are like highly creative, which is a large part of like why we went into social in the first place. We
Mhm.
like to engage with people, we like to build connections, not everybody maybe, like maybe to some degree, but then at the same time, like we also have like really deep data and insights and we have to know our stuff.
Mhm.
So I would just say like appreciate your local social media manager because I think they're quite unlike other people in organizations in the sense that like a lot of the times we're almost like brain ambidextrous. We have like left and right brain skills and tendencies, and we can enable you to sort of like bring a story to life.
Mhm.
So use us, use our ambidextrous brains.
Well, I'm so happy you brought that first part up because I was actually listening to a podcast last week and they were talking about the exact same thing, like talking about ninjas and gurus. And it was like, if you see this on a job posting, red flag, run the other
100%.
way. And it's so true. Like as social media managers or working in social, we do bring so much value. And it's been proven like social does help you generate leads and opportunities for your business. It is a growth engine. We're not just scrolling Instagram and doing magical things. Like we're providing value. So I'm so happy that you brought light to that, because I totally 100% agree.
It's very much like you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't think of your social media manager as like the intern fresh out of school, just like posting stuff on social media, but then also at the same time want like this like high level strategy. I'm like, just like find like, don't even find the in between, like go more towards like the second example that I gave, where it's like strategy, insights, creativity, innovation. Like social media managers have that. A lot of the times we just need, to have that voice at the table, and really show people, what our prowess looks like.
Well, I totally agree. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. I loved chatting with you and hearing all of your insights. And I'm so excited to share this episode with the world. So thank you so much for joining me on Behind the Post.
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia.